Shinji and Warhammer40k. All Along the Watchtower. Part 1. She knew she was different. She gasped for breath, and that was all it took. She couldn't find it. Why? The others around her had happy, mindless grins. They surrounded her, stroking all over, and experiencing the otherness in their awareness of what is. She pushed away and went over to the end of the world. Barrier. The word oozed into her consciousness. Glass. Beyond was empty and yet not. Air. She needed air. Glass was strange. It was there and not there at the same time. Matter was strange. It felt incomplete. She felt incomplete. Pain! So this was pain. The flesh was reminding her it was real. She hunched over and drowned, gasping, trying not to drown from all the fluid in her lungs. Clothes. She was cold. Clothes would help. The others were back to swimming in circles, forgetting entirely about her in the stupid bliss of their unchanging existence. The air was stale and unpleasant. This deep in the geofront, the circulators were old and barely functioning. It was very familiar. The memories were returning. Clothes were made out of cloth. She knew where to find plenty of cloth. However, she didn't intend to stay in terminal dogma. Proper clothes were necessary. She knew where to find that too. It was a long, uncomfortable walk to the Evangelion graveyard. The sight failed to impress. She had little to fear from the dark corners of the metal womb. It had been a year since she was there. If she could die, and twice, then logically it would be much easier to awaken within a brain still intact. The last time she had the benefit of her sister waiting with fresh raiment. There was a comforting pain. Return to me. The girl held a hand over the depths of one circular mass grave. Decomposition since then left nothing but dry flaps of skin over white bones and some wisps of bluish hair. She pulled the floating corpse over the edge and inspected the uniform. It stank faintly but seemed undamaged. The hole at the back of the skull had bled little. At least Gendo was considerate enough to clean up his mess, even going so far as to take a mop to the blood trail. Such methodical compulsion was amusing. Bone and all turned to fine powder, drifting away. The girl picked up and dusted off the garments on the floor. Rumpled, but serviceable. Panties first, then socks. The soles of her feet were still quite sensitive. Even the feel of the shirt on her back caused slight pain as it rubbed against her skin. But she was presentable. She was again as she should be. It was enough. She looked up at the cavernous ceiling and sighed. More complications. She hadn't expected this to happen. Ritsuko Akagi loved after-action debriefing sessions. Contrary to what most would expect, it was the best time for her to turn off her brain. She slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that everyone in the international network's scientific community would be trying to burn out their brains to beat her to the answers. Unfortunately, since all of them would be working with incomplete data, all they'd be able to give would be somewhat logical assumptions. Lots of assumptions. It would be a gross mistake to assume the Global Scientific Assembly was not political. Scientists had egos, and being the business of proving themselves right over all others, could be very intense prima donnas. Some believed the true mark of genius was to be always in the right, in any subject, above all others, at any moment. Ritsuko Akagi slept happily, knowing she was giving Dr. Fournier of the Sorbonne serious fits. Crazy stuff had happened that she must inevitably explain away. She could take comfort in that at least the insanity was over with, and no more in the near future unless she initiates her own experiments. I got nothing, she declared almost proudly when the command staff and the pilots were finally all together. This is the product of an AT field, and as such impossible to replicate with conventional technology. To use a metaphor, having a solid base to work on would make it easier to consider applications that use AT field layering. I know how we can reproduce the effects, but the why will have to wait. Gendo nodded. The most important issue now is if the S2 engine can be controlled. Everyone turned to Asuka. It's not my fault, she shouted with a flush. I already said it was the Evangelion, not me. She turned to Ray. So stop looking at me like that. And I said I believed you, Soyu, the girl replied with a nod. You would never attempt to abuse Pilot Akari in such a manner, and in person. Then she smiled as if to say, and even if he would be inclined to forgive you, rest assured I shall tear off your own arms and feed them to you. It was over so quickly, and with her face turned away, that only Asuka could see it. The red-haired girl snorted, as if to say, Oh, shut up. Regardless, she felt quite guilty about it. Unit 2 had gone berserker, but it was hardly trying to kill and devour Unit 1. It actually seems reasonable to me, if we consider that the Evangelions do possess their own biomechanical minds. That's the whole point of synchronization, after all. Ritsuko had an unlit cigarette in her mouth, and her hair was unkempt. It was a big departure from her customary neat and orderly self, as Misato's direct opposite in manners. It's a big bloody animal, that's what it is. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that it got a bit more power if it tried to assert its dominance as the alpha. Fortunately, everyone there knew English, so no one missed anything in her odd, unconscious shifts in speaking. Ritsuko had been doing that recently, mostly in English or German, probably because those were the languages of her scientific literature. She reserved French for insulting Europe's self-professed finest academic. Control is something we all have to work on. The S2 engine doesn't really give the Ava an unlimited operational range. Fortunately, there are hard blockers that prevent the Evangelions from independent activation. Unit 2 shut down after 9 minutes of operation. Ritsuko gestured to the screen, which showed the Ava cages. 2 and 1 were placed facing each other. The problem is that even without the entry plug, the S2 engine cannot be turned off. It's a power source. Since installation into the Ava was rather unorthodox, I'm concerned that attempts to actually shut down the biomechanical organ would be problematic.
Define problematic, Gendo demanded.
Best case, the S2 engine would fuse together into a useless lump of goo. Worst case would be the conversion of an Evangelion's total mass into antimatter.
Asuka winced. A single gram of antimatter was roughly equivalent to 20 kilotons of TNT, or about the same explosive power as the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima.
Wait a second! If an antimatter containment failure is what vaporized the American site, then why do I have the S2 engine intact in my Ava? I believe it has to do with the properties of the Dirac Sea, the scientist replied indulgently. Simply speaking, the Angel must have sucked in Evangelion Unit 4 while leaving the antimatter behind. Perhaps it is because the Angel possessed its own S2 engine, and there would be conflict within its altered space. So what do we do about Unit 4? Misato asked. Can we replace it? We'd be better off using it for spare parts at this point, Ritsuko replied as Maya changed the screen to the relevant slides. Not only would it be a risk due to the Angel's control over an unpiloted Ava, but it was designed from the start to operate using the S2 engine. Our power systems are incompatible with it. We could send it back to NERV Boston to be rebuilt, but they already have an intact Ava we could use.
Misato looked excited.
I see! So we could send it back on the same carrier, bringing that Evangelion here!
She then looked to Gendo questioningly. It was Fuyutsuki who answered. We have put in a request, but ultimately it is the UN's decision. He bounced that look off to Kaji. It depends mostly on how likely Angel's attacks would be for other nations. No one really has any idea what 4 Evangelions could accomplish that 3 wouldn't. Besides, we have the S2 engine now. Can we duplicate it here? He then glanced up to Ritsuko. Her eyeglasses glinted. She looked irritated.
No, this is primarily an Evangelion research and construction facility. And, as you doubtless have seen, we haven't even bothered to try and build another Ava just to get a spare, she hissed out. We don't have the raw manufacturing capacity to attempt that.
She looked pointedly at Gendo. Reflexively, he swatted at the air, as if driving off a fly. We have neither the budget nor the time. And it was almost painful to say, Titan modules provided by the conglomerate serve well enough. There is also the Ashino Lance Cannon. We have too many distractions from our central purpose.
NERV was supposed to be the unquestioned master of the Evangelion. They were not supposed to be sharing the limelight with that Trident thing, or have a subsidiary industrial city grow around Tokyo 3, or even for its control to dilute so much. Where did it start to go wrong? He looked accusingly at Misato. She started to panic. What? What did I do this time? I mean, it's not my fault. I was nowhere near that place and had nothing to do with whatever it is.
Gendo lifted his white eyebrow a fraction.
Misato turned to Ritsuko and screamed, You said you burned those pictures!
The blonde scientist nursed a rising migraine, an errant frond of her hair bobbing up and down.
I should burn you. All of you, she whispered.
At that point, red light flooded the room. Alarms began to scream. "Oh, what is it now?" Ritsuko asked, annoyed. "Blue pattern detected. Colonel Katsuragi, please report to the command center." Makoto Hyuga's voice over the intercom was entirely too calm. "We've detected the Earth's Cradle in orbit." Even Gendo set aside decorum as everyone in the room stampeded for the elevator. UNIG/Cerberus base has to tie into NERV sensors to truly see the Earth's Cradle. It was giving off such an AT field powerful enough to fuzz up all radar over Europe. However, the thing was really hard to miss. It also lit up the sky as ploughed through the upper atmosphere, unnatural and slow. Its black shell was torn and jagged bits glowed white hot from air friction. It was a ball of fire, a baleful light upon the American west coast. "Damn, that thing's taking a beating," Masato commented upon seeing the earlier scans, before the field fuzzed up the magnetosphere with its weirdness. The thermal scans gave off a somewhat psychedelic rippling effect. She had to force herself to look away. "What on earth, or of it, could have even harmed the Earth's Cradle? I mean, aside from us, obviously."
"And even there we weren't too successful, Katsuragi," Kaji replied glibly.
Masato's command chair whirred to face backwards. "And why are you even here?"
"Moral support."
The operations director sighed and swiveled her chair back. "So I guess the UN wants to keep all its nukes pointed at Tokyo free?" No answer was necessary. "Fine. Before we try anything, where's this thing going to land?" The main screen showed a wireframe image of the globe. The cradle pitched from side to side, but its descent was slow enough to hint at some measure of control. Some. "The thing is unaerodynamic as hell," Ritsuko commented upon the least insane factor in the situation. A dotted line extended from the cradle, tracing its probable rate of descent. Dip, 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 across the Atlantic. Asuka Langley Soryu let out an incoherent scream of rage and stomped away from the command center. The automatic doors couldn't open fast enough. "Not again!" Masato hissed. "What did Germany do to deserve this? NERV assets there have already been relocated."
"NERV assets, yes, but not SEELE assets. You know the saying, Katsuragi, once it's an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times it's a conspiracy." Hours later, the Earth's Cradle returned to the Earth. The slowness of its descent was deceptive. It was at least several hundred kilometers per hour. So massive that the amount of air it shoved out of its way was that thunderstorms wreaked havoc all over Europe. It was as if a great eye had opened up in the sky. Asuka was holed up in her room, sitting with her knees up in a fetal position. "Red Star fall!" she whispered. The cradle slammed into the ground, carving down to bedrock, fusing into glass with immense heat. It bounced. It was almost obscene. The mind rebelled at such a sight. The next crash down was stronger than the first, gouging out a longer and deeper scar. Again, for a few maddening moments, the thing returned to the air, spinning lightly. Asuka bit her lip and shivered. "Stain the earth red!" It crashed for a final time, the quake registering as magnitude 8, though through AT field effects didn't damage anything much more than a dozen kilometers off. Within that region, however, it was a world of death. "Damn you!" she cried. "Goddamn angels! Even if we're supposed to perish, we're not just going to hand over this world to you!" A dark and leprous fog rose from around the fallen cradle, choking the air and swallowing spiny remnants of black forests. There was silence. And just like that, fear began its rule. Unlike NERV's geofront, the Earth's Cradle didn't possess a spherical shell to provide structure. Though it was blasted out of a mountain, even nuclear devices couldn't create a perfect cavern. It was also necessary to support the walls and ceiling, that the millions of tons of rock shouldn't crush what it was supposed to protect. The layout looked more like an odd teardrop shape, arranged around the central shaft. Iruel's core lay at the centre of a perfect sphere, containing the Earth's Cradle and its surrounding Earth, a sphere 6 kilometres across. It provided the casing that allowed survival through all but the most adverse of conditions, such as that similar to what happens at the corona of a star. The very heart of the cradle was dimly lit, most of that light coming from the glowing blue angel core. In fact, the entire level was a confusing mess of shadows, stairs, jutting framework, and highly unsafe railingless walkways.
The darkness helped discourage, or at least make it more difficult, for snoopers. They would never see the things that waited with vicious glee for those who dared that did not belong. But mostly, it used to be Dr. Lader's laboratory. He had full control over the Earth's Cradle. He just liked being an asshat like that. Those who worked within it had natural night vision in any case. The technicians either had slit animalistic pupils or had their eyeballs replaced entirely by glowing green visors. Kaworu Nagisa stepped up to the platform directly above the core, his feet unerring in the shadows. Everything was clear as day to him. It was a few days before Layla's attack. He looked up to the men still in their silvered armour suspended in the air. They were alive by a narrow degree of definition. The hybrids smiled slightly. Thick cables sprouted from their backs like bony wings, and wires pierced their silvered helms as akin to spiny halos. Nutrients bubbled up through clear tubes into their abdomens. The silence rang with their torment. Still life, Kaworu mused. An exercise in futility. He stepped up to the central platform directly above Irurel's core. Again he glanced up to the captured psychers down to Leilul's pulsating blue sphere. He smiled thinly. You will hide no more secrets from me. There was a landing pad at the centre of the platform. The darkness seemed to crack, with lines of silvery energy flickering in and out. With a whoosh of displaced air, something burst out of empty space. Martin Arthur Bettelheim dropped to the mesh metal floor and began rolling around. He was on fire. Kaworu sighed, and with a gesture those flames subsided. Now do you believe when I say it's a bad idea to try and tangle with a golden saint? While shuffling anyone with psychic potential off to Tokyo 3 as some sort of meta-human registration act actually works out to our advantage, that doesn't mean we don't need to act with subtlety. I am going to kill that bitch, the teenager snarled. I'll make her scream. Kaworu sighed again. Stubborn determination had its good points, but if all you want to be is a feral attack drone, then you don't need the portions of your brain that grant higher intelligence. He smirked. Just tell me if you want more power. You will have it. The Trident Warborn pilot grumbled resentfully, but stepped to attention. The air above Virurel's core sparked again, and a live cloaked figure emerged. Nagisa, Sarah Campbell greeted with a respectful bow. Oh, now finally someone who does understand subtlety. I assume with Martin here drawing all attention, you fulfilled your objective? Certain enclaves are prepared to join us. Not all psychers actually respect the UN's heavy-handed efforts. Given a chance between power and captivity, they chose power. Good. The Psychana, no matter how much they sugarcoat their words, were practicing a policy of discrimination. Well, I did manage to secure bodies for what we're up to, Martin added with a whine. I only used half the gold you gave me. I managed to secure the assistance of several high-echelon generals and politicians. It was easy. They were lollicons. It doesn't count. He took in her cloaked form. Come here. She obediently did so. He put his hands on her hips and asked roughly, How fast did they get? Her unnaturally red lips twitched up in a cruel smirk. The new mindworms are much smaller, containing patterns to grow inside the body, and may travel up very small orifices. She looked satisfied. I'm sure it was painful. Good.
Kaworu stepped away to let them have that odd bonding moment. Both teenagers had little problem in treating their bodies as one more weapon, reinforced by the forced evolution of their symbiotes. The hybrid had a naturally flexible idea of what constitutes self, but the two had bonded in a way that disturbed even him. It wasn't a codependency of camaraderie, not love, not friendship, but perhaps just as enduring. They followed him as he walked up the levels to a variety of mysterious apparatus. Though he had all that power and absolute obedience, Kaworu felt even more strongly alone. All his closest kin wanted to kill him. The one who could truly comprehend his motivations would probably not leave anyone speaking heresy against humanity leave with his tentacles unsquished. Soyu, you're one of the few who can really understand. All things are tools. You can have power. You may be beautiful forever. He thought with a sigh. Save me from being surrounded by all too predictable fools. Dr. Lader, status report, Kaworu asked aloud as he reached the circular dais. The darkness began to light up with glow lamps and assorted blink lights. Loud metallic laughter rolls all around, and upon a curved main screen, Lader's face appeared. It was a photomosaic picture, only formed out of thousands of live video and monitoring sections, just to show off his processing power.
The status, like you asked the last time, is approaching perfection, the scientist replied exultingly. Everything runs at the fullest efficiency. Nothing escapes my inspiring attention.
Some are uncomfortable about how this impacts their privacy. You might want to tone it down.
Like I care about any of their disgusting meatbag ways. You are all so slow, so hideous, so consumed by repetitive, pointless needs. How can any of you consider your limited fleshy awareness living? The world's finest minds. Ha! Pathetic bundles of delusional neurons. I am the very harbinger, the crack in the singularity.
Be proudly post-humanist some other time, Doctor. What the Moon Cradle lacks in a controlling intelligence, it more than makes up for having survived over 4 billion years. The disembodied scientist frowned.
How?
He asked, LEDs flaring red.
Who built the Moon Cradle? I severely doubt the angels would have any need for such technology.
It's a mystery to me too, but regardless, it has powerful weapons. Very powerful weapons. Facing away from the planet, it can threaten things out through astronomical units. But fortunately, I also know the weapon requires angel DNA for activation, and takes a very long time to charge. Kaworu looked up sharply. So, have you settled the exit conditions?
Time dilate here in other space. I can calculate to a degree where we should drop out of warp, but not the when. We may be off by several hours. Fortunately, it seems psychic energy and the AT field are mutually opposing.
Lights all around turned green.
We may approach in stealth.
Martin chuckled darkly. Fine, fine. How is my jagged wolf? I want to hit hard and fast. It was bad enough just trying to capture that angel. It needs to be much stronger, more worthy of me.
The modifications are complete. It is not an S2 engine, but for the same warped space properties. The cradle may now feed power directly into the jagged wolf's core. Like the Evangelions, it is part angel.
Dr. Lader turned to Sarah.
The Phoenix Spasm likewise.
Back to Kaworu.
The Barrel Leos, however, is a total loss. Your new Trident Warborn is still incomplete in having to build around an enemy's casing.
Kaworu nodded somberly. As long as we're ready. Below his feet, 2 more great spheres began to glow, one red and the other yellow. Angel calls designate Bardial and Zerial. The dark side of the moon held a different character to one familiar to everyone. Instead of the rolling craters and empty seas that gave the impression of a face, the friendly man in the moon, the far side was a pockmarked mess. The Earth's Cradle slid out of the darkness, its matte black shell difficult to discern. It hung in space near the moon's south pole, or the South Pole Aitken Basin.
The largest impact crater in the solar system, formed in the early stages, from something very large striking at low velocity at a very low angle.
The doctor commented idly in his heart-rasping mechanical voice.
Though Oceanus Procellarum is proposed to be a much larger and older impact crater.
No, this is older. Kaworu looked up at the map with a slight frown. To spin the moon around, I know the very thing that caused this. Adam remembers. Though she sleeps, it was a very satisfying memory.
Oh, this would be billions of years ago, when the world was still molten rock. What did happen?
If the moon faced inward at that time, as evidenced perhaps from the much larger assortment of seas and craters that gave the near side its interesting shadows. then it would have to conveniently strike the moon, though being drawn by the Earth's gravity well. Or the merest fraction of that unimaginably ancient memory linked to their shared telepathic consciousness was a humbling experience, beyond what the scientist had ever felt. It only served to intensify his own ego afterwards, unfortunately. A being that had no problem walking around lava should not have been brought low by mere creatures such as man. I remember when the moon was red and the world was clad in thick raiment. Kaworu spoke in a hollow tone. I remember shaping stars and watching my creatures eat their fill out of worlds. I remember... He clutched at his face and snarled in pain. More than violence, closer than a caress, rending the fabric of reality, the battles between the Evangelions and angels pale beside the wrath of their source. When true gods war, worlds returned to the cauldron. In many ways, the Earth was fortunate. They spent most of their power against each other and settled the issue well before life could assert itself. Filthy thieves and worthless charlatans! The angel hybrid snarled, still covering half his face. He wanted to dig into his own skull. Today we make them pay for their arrogance! Despite what most expected, the vast majority of people within the Earth's Cradle weren't mind-controlled slaves or nihilistic lunatics. Carol looked around the perfectly serviceable control centre and saw only their absolute and freely given trust. The shared telepathic consciousness made lying an absolute impossibility. There was a very distinctive beeping. Main screen turn on. Oh wait, we already did that. The projector showed a flat black slab with O1 sound only in glowing red upon it. Ah, Chairman Keel, Kaworu greeted cheerfully. Other slabs appeared in a holographic matrix surrounding the white-haired team. This was a surprise even to Dr. Lader. The Earth's Cradle's comm systems weren't built like that.
Nagisa,
the O1 slab said in a tonal, faintly echoing voice.
What is your business here?
I have come to end this farce.
Still befriending mortals, I see. Has it ever turned out well?
SEELE 4 said sharply.
You have gone, Nagisa. I will not ask you to return to our side, but I demand you cease your attack.
The hybrid sighed again. I will not. He rubbed at his forehead. I am free of your chains, old men. And madam, with a nod to SEELE 7, I've come to take back what is mine.
Then you will regret these words. I look forward to when we meet again.
SEELE 4 blinked out.
Nagisa, we had an agreement. Doing this will forever separate you from the unity you so long desired, said SEELE 1. Do not underestimate the power we yet command, and we hold the key to your immortality. Desist now, and we may yet forget your betrayal.
I said no. Your poisons and plots no longer trouble me.
You would not be here without us, Nagisa. Reject your purpose at our own peril.
It is also written, my parents are the heaven and the earth. My home is my body. My strength is adaptability. My ambition is taking every opportunity with fullness. My friend is my mind. My enemy is carelessness. My protection is right action. And my weapons are everything that exists. It is not my hand that I am once again given flesh. The pleasure of destroying you is not something I can ever surrender to Ikari. The members of SEELE began to blink out, their disgust clear in the silence. Only SEELE 1 remained.
The details are different, said Keel, but this remains a scenario that was expected.
Kaworu felt giddy. Second only to battling out with Ikari and Tokyo 3 directly, he felt so alive. His human half roared and raged, filling his veins with anticipation. He could feel the animal mind of the cradle respond. A window on the main screen projection opened up. It showed the face of a white-moustached military man. Ah, General Stockman, are the forces ready? I apologize for shoving you into play, but we lack any real air or space force generals. So you'll have to do.
This is insane. You're insane, the Scot mumbled out. You've damned us all.
Look, you know these hide-brains are much more reliable than any AI we can make right now, and putting bioforms out means you shouldn't have soldiers to waste and silly moral quandaries to make.
I don't agree with anything you said, and this is all still blasphemy against all that's just and holy. What you've done to us will never be right again.
And you're sentient again. So what if you were a self-aware brain in a jar for a few days before we could prepare a clone body? You're a soldier, General. You know what we have to do. Get over it.
You will burn, Nagisa. I will spend my immortality waiting to see it.
Yes, the centre's encouraged in the communal consciousness, democratic process for the greater good, and so on. Everyone could feel his frustration. Why does Shinji Ikari get to have unflinching competence when it is I who directly improve upon their own strengths? Reassurance flowed back through the telepathic commonality. Human beings, so trapped in their own limited perspectives, a simple fact of their pitiful lifespan. You have been lied to. You have been betrayed. He spoke out through the cradle-wide speakers. You are offered a sacrifice to their egos. Not all of you have chosen to accept the gift of the Regenesis, but you are here because you know the truth. Even NERV is nothing more than a puppet. We are the ones truly worthy of this power and protecting the Earth. Banish your fear and let us fight. Only fools stand in the way of the greater good. There were no cheers, but there was only the utter certainty of the prepared mind.
Shaul!
Martin Bettelheim laughed as his jagged wolf launched itself out into space. The moon's scant gravity grabbed at his trident warborn and brought it down lightly as a leaf. The phoenix spasm flew out of the iris, opening with shrieking speed, though vacuum was no place for wings. Dust flew up as he landed, and his machine beast set off at an easy lope across the chalky, blasted terrain. It was very saurian, though more aloe than tyranno. It had 6 globular eyes, 2 facing forward and 2 pairs along the side of its skull. It had jagged, overlapping scales as armour, and sharp spines protruded out from the back of its head. In the hollow of the age-forgotten terrain there stood a monolith. It was formed of black yet faintly greenish rock, like extremely aged cheese. It was a steep tower with the ground around it broken as if stabbed through. The featureless rock began to ripple, and through standing liquid emerged 6 large white-winged shapes.
So they are finished,
Dr. Lader hissed.
Evangelion mass production type.
It has been a year. They may not have had Ritsuko Akagi, but even trial and error has its use in developing the dummy plug system. The mention of NERV's famous scientist irked Lader, but Kaworu seethed with SEELE's defilement of his own flesh. Eyeless, worm-like heads with thick red lips bared their teeth and took flight. Indeed, there was great resemblance between the Warborns and the MPA Evangelions. They carried large double-ended weapons, like 2 broadswords stuck together hilt to hilt as a hugely improbable spear. Sarah Campbell banked low to the ground as the Avers approached. Trident Warborn Phoenix Spasm had the same basic shape to the jagged wolf, if upside down. The legs became forward-canted wings and arms ended in sickle claws. It retained the chin-mounted 20mm cannon for some reason. The rounds plinked against the Avers' massive blades, used as a shield. They swooped down, predators to feast upon a baser creature. The jagged wolf leapt up and caught one with its massive jaws. The Aver shrieked and tried to beat at the thing chomping down around its waist, but the man-like arms of the Warborn was enough to keep it at bay. Martin tasted bitter and spicy blood as the trident began to drink. The white-armoured Aver wailed and began to shrink, even as the biomechanical muscles of his trident began to bulk out. Its 6 eyes began to glow. Bones began to protrude, turning into armour. Meat was torn apart, cells reshaped, and ancient strength poured into new skins. The other Evangelions hung in space, confused. They were beyond fear, but their instincts returned conflicting impressions. Remaining motionless to watch something gorge upon a reflection of themselves. A bad idea. The Phoenix Spasm rushed at one, impaling it with its claws and dragged it to the ground. Sarah exposed her Warborn's own serrated teeth, and likewise began to feed. That shocked them into action. The white Evangelions began to fly in circles around the two, reaching for the proper moment to act. There was unity there, beauty in motion even among great monstrosities. Just the sight of it pained Kaworu. Martin began to laugh hysterically. He tossed away the nearly hollow MP with a flick of his head and roared. The sound was carried through the medium of an active AT field. The MP-Avers hissed in response and separated. They flew low and fast, and the Warborns rushed to meet them. All their defiant roars mingled in the light of their souls, and when they met, there was only blinding power. Shinji Ikari had a reputation. The same reputation as his father, incidentally. The boy had no trust for his ridiculous string of luck, for the random number gods would turn on their followers in the most unexpected moments. The degree of paranoid preparations and backup plans unfortunately only added to the effect. It was not as if Yang was not accused of the same nigh-on precognitive planning, but there was also the benefit to having telepaths in your staff. The Chinese genius was probably even encouraging the rumours, just so he could have the comfort of people looking at someone else first before doing anything, just for change. Angel attacks aside, oh yes, Yang Wen-Li was quite happy with the situation. Shinji Ikari was feeling what the former admiral had to deal with from day to day, trying to escape the unconscious analysis of every piece of data that comes along. Survival depended upon that frantic clarity. Being stuck underground in NERV's hospital meant he had access only to information anyone could bring. Someone more brash would have ranted and raved about being denied access to news, just for the sake of saving his mind the worry. To him, the path of least resistance was the easiest. Simply to let his mind abandon worry, to relax. If they needed him, they'd ask for it. The rest of them were competent in their own fields. That he accepted the necessity was different from the fact he was starting to get bored out of his own skull. Everything's the same, day after day. Fine, the books are interesting, and I know I can blow out of here any time I wish, he mused. But that world seems so self-consistent too. How do I really know this isn't some illusion in an overlapping matrix? Ah, but I'm here, am I not? I mean, seriously, how's insanity a proof of being able to perceive reality? The boy said while he nursed a migraine. How can arguing with myself be considered a sign of mental health? He groaned. By the Emperor, I'm so bored. At the same time, a portion of his mind was shouting, Are you nuts? Well, okay, yes you are, but being bored is a good thing. Maya, the illusionary world, the young teen murmured. Yes, then 2 months in a Buddhist monastery couldn't make him think he was anywhere even close to enlightenment. Though he had the oaths of obedience from most of the hidden psychic sub-societies on Earth, it still rankled that with raw power he could kick around those who had attained enlightenment. A fragment of memory drifted across his consciousness.
Cheats he does, massively,
the chief abbot of Javal tried to explain.
As if brain size of a house he has, weighing more tons than everyone here combined. Power outside altogether can mold Nirvana to be free of the cycle of suffering. But even if trapped gods are, does not mean command line parameters they lack. Boy got mad skills, yes.
You're fired, said Shinji Ikari. That other world, that fear. It's been so long since I felt such nightmares. He had no doubts about the fate of humanity. He just had to trust all the tools were up to the task. There was a reason he refused to predict the possibilities around his loved ones, other than the basic will not to have them as mere puppets to him. There were too many possibilities that end with their deaths. There's a reason I fear the moment to really cut loose. The room was the same. The geofront layout was the same. He closed his eyes and could trace in his mind the path of rampage to the cages. He could still hear the alarms, could smell the harsh trace of ozone in the air, and taste the sheer desperation. There was a wall there. Now there was none. That look of fear in Asuka's eyes. And yearning? She wanted to be strong, to be seen as the best. There was nothing exactly preventing her from being Shinji Ikari's equal in every way, but the Asuka Langley Soryu he knew was much happier with the direct approach. That one didn't know the difference between strength and power. It was cruelly destroying her certainties. The savage otherness in Ayanami's eyes. How conscious could Lilith be? He was trapped with a girl more omnicidal than the usual. Misato looked at him with such hatred. The 9mm Beretta she carried couldn't harm him, and Shinji told her that. So she pulled out a HK MP5 submachine gun and let him have it full auto. He felt like laughing. That was why he loved her, but telling her that could only make her more angry. Unit 1 was not willing to cooperate. It was painful to be rejected. He could share that. It was his personal nightmare, fulfilled to the utmost. He had to pretty much destroy all hope for that world just to escape. What matters is that it felt real. What remains is a moral defeat. The Farseer frowned and crossed her arms. How long do you plan on whining about this? Visions in themselves may be misleading or self-fulfilling. What do you fear more, having to do that again, or not having to will to actually do so when it proves necessary? Remember your own creed. The wise do not fear. The fearful do not think. I stand at the edge of a cliff. Do you understand? Once I start, it's going to be very difficult to stop. I have too many secrets. You know, if I tried that here, the least I can expect is a bolt round to the face. Every choice has its consequence. It's bad enough people listen to me in potentia of the threat I represent. Actualise that and I'd have got the plan going on how to seize control of all those nukes. That's not going to make anybody happy. It all boils down to control. Too little and there's only death for those I touch. Too much and I end up with just slaves all around me. An interesting return to the Mahayana teaches we tasting. In all things, let there be moderation, even in moderation. Well did the Eldar know Slanesh, the chaos god of excesses. They were creatures of emotional extremes, and it took the death of their race to temper that heart. Shinji clenched his bony hands into fists. It's still not right. How did this happen? A year ago, my greatest concern was to save up enough money for some classic books at an online auction. A year ago, I would have laughed at the notion I'd ever cause nations to think twice. He clutched at his head. Even now, I can't believe it. How'd this happen? The probabilities are ridiculous. How could I warp so much of the world? This must be how Akagi-sensei feels all the time. By the Emperor, I feel her torment. It's not logical. How? Get enough people to believe something, and it acquires a reality all its own, the Farseer replied with a contemptuous toss of her flowing black hair. She leaned back and let the sunlight filter through her fingers. Thus exist such powerful notions as religion, nation, duty, destiny. You are controlled as much as you control. Look too deep into one future and you lose all sight. A year ago, my worst fear was looking foolish among my peers. Now, even though increasing factors should muddle up potential events well beyond prediction, everything's just clicking, fitting to leave two futures. Either one, some, all of those I live must die, or we suffer impact. This is obvious. Even a warped mind can see the odds stacked against it. You would be in even more denial than the usual if you actually even fantasized that anyone can emerge out of this unscathed. She smiled cruelly. It is not fear that you shirk from. It is the shame that you feel of being excited for getting the great work done. Do go away. The boy sighed and waved aside. Dust drifted off, formless in the sunbeams off a windowsill. A few moments later, the door to his hospital room opened. Misato stood there, her face carefully expressionless. Oh, Shinji said, wide-eyed. Bad news? There's something you need to see, Shinji-kun, the woman said softly. She stood there in full dress uniform. She had her hat on, and didn't look happy. Unsurprisingly, the world's first reaction to the Earth's Cradle touching down, other than, oh shit, was to mass for an assault. Germany had escaped impact more or less unscathed. Sahakral's assault pulverised Berlin too, but otherwise left the army intact. This was fortunate, but it also brought up bad memories. A minor civil war almost broke out from the UN decree for registration. It was discrimination. It would have been racism if only psychoactivity wasn't so damn random. The subcultures were limited to who they could or choose to protect, of course. Hitler's obsession with the occult coincided with SEELE's needs, leading finally to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. Nevertheless, echoes of that time were to be avoided. From the simple marks of identification to the slow erosion of liberties, then to be feared, despised, treated as subhuman. Many fought against the UN measure, and not without good cause. It took the destruction of Madrid, the burning of Budapest, and the running battle through Salt Lake City to convince the world the risks just might outweigh certain moral crimes. Death or imprisonment remained an unappealing choice. Only a De Adeptus Psychana could reliably identify human psychics and could defend against those who got out of control. That was where parallels to the Holocaust began to break down. Death was no comfort, as parasite creatures could take over any recently deceased body just as fine. There was something even more macabre about it, that the rot and the infirmities would be repaired all the way back to living condition. Hearts would beat, blood would flow. The mindworms couldn't repair neurons, but replace it. They were all undead in the sense of being cured of that malady. If you were caught, would enough of your consciousness remain to scream in silence, even as your body tried to defile your loved ones? Mutation forms were worse, with touched, spiny skins, baked jaws, and claws that could tear open tank armor like paper. There seemed to be no difference as to what level of psychic potential you once had. As if there was a genetic trigger, then the parasites would accelerate the body's evolutionary defenses. Damn things were bulletproof, and would heal enough to get through that hide. The wounds would heal up so frighteningly fast. The machine gun, historically ending mass charges, was insufficient to deal with such a return to brutal inhuman warfare. Only the Adeptus Psychana, the suddenly revealed secret, could stand against that terror. Only the Legio Heraclitus, with their mighty armour, could wade deep into the sea of corruption. Individuals with psychic potential, for their protection, had to be relocated to more secure locations. Concentration camps, some would spit. Even 1% of 1% of 3 billion was still 300,000 people. Jafar was open to the world at last. While the mountains were easy to defend, it was also hideously difficult to get there. The UN had teeth at last, but it was hard to move with unanimous unpopularity. Tokyo 3 was by all definitions the most fortified location on the planet, but also the most dangerous. Those who boarded black ships to go there were almost entirely volunteers, gambling on the great work. NERV's American branch was less dangerous, but still in clear possibility of an attack. There was risk in putting people so close to the Evangelions. True, the God Machines were best able to protect them, but it was impossible to remove resentment, and there was always the possibility of sabotage. America had its own Evangelion. Most of Asia was within the AT field umbrella of NERV's 3 battle-proven Evangelions. Europe wasn't so lucky. They had to make do with military bases, which, while defensible, indeed brought up so many bad memories. 3 armies converged almost immediately upon the Earth's Cradle. The core members of SEELE had already moved to the safety of the Moon Cradle and had little influence or interest in the world's more mundane affairs. Russia didn't have a monopoly on bolt guns, the frame and the formula easy enough to reproduce. France and Germany rushed to the site, somewhere south of Leipzig. The NSSR, having the most experience against the horrors the Cradle might unleash, rushed with little resistance through Poland. Cheered on even. It was an odd experience. The dark, purplish miasma around the Cradle spread. It choked the air, fouling up radar and radio. A pulsating, confusing mess, even on infrared. It was a literal no man's land. Those who dared to venture inside, to evacuate the towns caught within. None of them returned. A reconnaissance in force, massive force, was required. They had tanks, they had men, they had directed microwave communicators, they had Psychana attaches, they had artillery. Bombers were at pre-planned flight paths, ready to drop N2 mines should the armies fail even one scheduled communication slot. They went in, fully prepared every single one of them might die. They went out barely 15 minutes afterwards. They brought word. Kaworu Nagisa had surrendered. The reactions were predictable. "What the fuck?" Misato had yelled right at the UN Secretary-General's face. The woman had decided to break the news directly, instead of relying on Kaji. "You can't possibly be serious!" "Look, like it or not, we don't need any more enemies right now. Other than the damage from the Earth's Cradle crashing down, they haven't actually done anything we can prove to be malicious. Kaworu Nagisa seems sincere in his offer of a truce." Misato began to rub at her forehead. She wasn't sure why, but Shinji had a real hate-on for the boy. It could be just jealousy, since Asuka was being very vague about how much contact she had with Nagisa. But there was no data whatsoever on the boy's background, and both the Elder and Ikari and Ritsuko were being more evasive than the usual about it. Misato hated secrets. Yet it was secrets she now carried. She supposed she was being rather obvious about it. That Shinji Ikari was far too polite to ask only made her feel more guilty. The boy was often so soft-spoken and deliberate that there was some sadistic thrill in seeing what it would take to push that berserk button. Responsibility weighed heavily on Misato's shoulders. She was unsuitable as a mother figure or role model, and a recent kick upstairs forced her to balance between leading the small army around Tokyo free and taking care of her children. She'd choose the latter over the former, no question. She sighed as she sat, feeling like a woman involved more than sweat and pleasure in being filled. The domesticity back at her apartment was such at odds with how, in the end, only she had the authority to order them into their deaths. She was getting too attached. Bad. Very bad for command. Misato went over to her seat, pointedly ignoring the slow tapping of Shinji's walking stick as he went over to his own usual spot. For all the damage the boy could cause, it was still surprising how fragile he actually looked in person. Gendo was elsewhere, and so was Kaji. Everyone else on high command was there, even Yang in a direct teleconference link to Cerberus base. Shinji had to resist the urge to ask why they all wore such serious faces. Even Asuka seemed more agitated than usual, leaning back on her chair and drumming impatiently with her fingertips on the table. Maya looked worried, but as before, no one else seemed to notice since she was just there to run the projector. Uncharacteristically, Rei had a look of concern directed at Asuka, while Ritsuko just seemed far too relaxed. "That's a nice screen," Shinji said to Yang as he sat at his usual spot, between the two other pilots. The former admiral nodded. It was an LCD monitor with a mini-camera on a motorized base. "It's not like there are any bandwidth problems over 3 kilometers away. Still, you people are far too paranoid about letting anyone into the geofront." He swiveled to look at each there in turn. Mana Kirishima being the obvious exception, since her command of Magnos Tancred was closely linked to the Evangelions. Yang had yet to actually meet Gendo, which was a pleasant accident. Misato coughed. "All right, let's get this strategic meeting to order." She took a deep breath as the lights darkened slightly. "Ritsuko?" The blonde muttered something about existing for exposition nowadays, and began narrating recent events. Light reflecting off the screen showed the boy's face shocked and frantic. The Earth's Cradle, damaged or not, was still 6 kilometers across. In an uncontrolled descent, it would have hit the force of a multi-megaton nuke. That it had enough power to control its descent was more troubling. That's why NERV decided not to use the anti-orbital Ashino lance cannon to knock it out of the sky. The purplish miasma creeping out the swollen sphere marked a place outside of mankind's dominion. "I understand. Letting me worry about this wouldn't have helped anything," Shinji said dully. "Yang-sensei's here, and you, Misato-san, and Ritsuko-sensei. The strategic level's easy to settle. The only reason to bring me here..." The screen flickered and switched onto a smiling face. Shinji unclenched his fingers and put a hand over Asuka's own shaking fists. "Kaworu." "My name is Kaworu Nagisa," the young teen said. Confidence. Ever confidence. He had a manner that reassured that complex problems could be reduced to simpler and solvable components. "I speak for the Earth's Cradle. I am here to ask you to allow for humanity's greater good." It was a worldwide broadcast, carried by news services allowed entry into the cradle. Behind the boy was a circle within a circle symbol of the Tau. Oddly appropriate, thought those who knew about angel calls. "The Earth's Cradle is partially angel, as you see, but does that mean it has to be this world's enemy? Evangelions are born of angel flesh. Are you afraid of the angel parasites? I'll tell you this, it's not the first time human and angel DNA was mixed. NERV and I share the same objectives, but while they may like to keep their secrets, the Cradle will give you all. I am Kaworu Nagisa. I have been created as a human-angel hybrid. Like Ayanami Rei, like what they intend for the pilots. We are made to be weapons, to be used up for the Evangelions. I deny this fate." Shinji turned to Rei, who shrugged faintly. When was this released?" he asked hoarsely. 8 hours ago," replied Ritsuko, pausing the video for a while. "So portions of it were shown in the morning news." NERV had made its own initial press response. "What you're looking at is a complete transmission direct from NATO." He turned to look at Rei. "You've been at school," the boy realised. Maya's influence had led to Ray owning more than just her school uniforms for casual wear. Was there any trouble? Ray shook her head. Apparently it explained her weirdness. Some of the students were wary, but it was Tokyo free. Even that failed to shock them. Asuka spoke up that anyone who crossed Ayanami would answer to her, and to Kari, and Toji, and Mana. Kensuke didn't really care either way. Genetics were so haphazard. So that's why my father isn't here. He's explaining himself to the UN, isn't he? Kaworu could be lying, but it has been said that great lies are often more believable than little truths. Ritsuko-sensei, your records. The scientist sniffed. Sometimes secrets are kept away from the light for a reason. Somehow I'm not surprised you children already know about this. It caught Masato off guard, like many. Ritsuko knew most forms of DNA testing wouldn't show Ray as any more than human, but Gendo was trying to turn such things into leverage. She didn't bother to deny it. The scenario called for things to come to a head soon enough. There was no point trying to slow down the political process. It all came down to the Evangelions anyway. No court had any power as long as the angels remained a threat. NERV secrets. Nagisa, by revealing them, could hobble Tokyo free as the UN had to demand proofs either way for each assertion. Oddly enough, the existence of SEELE was so cliché and unbelievable that Kaworu decided not to mention that. We don't have to fight against each other. Look around you. The Cradle was humanity's last hope against extinction, and now it can offer you so much. We are in no way your enemies. I applaud NERV and Tokyo Free's defense of the world, but humanity's future is here. What with the bouncing and the spinning, one would have assumed it would be a miracle for the Cradle to land right side up. Even if it could shift in place, should still have an underground layout. The walls were of faintly translucent metal. There was something unnerving about the place, being able to reshape itself to suit its occupants. It was a living thing, while the power of Tokyo Free was clad in metaphor. There were no hard edges to be found, and the soothing pastel colours were not paint. The journalists were wary but amazed, the military with them itching with paranoia. It was all too safe and welcoming. They were maintaining the quarantine, but no one wanted to leave it in the first place. You have questions, said Kaworu, still smiling faintly. The conference hall had a missing fourth wall, allowing those inside to see the looming shapes of the Trident Warborns. Please let me answer them to your satisfaction. 3 armies were poised to strike, but were held at bay that nothing short of a nuke, and even that was uncertain, could even hope to inconvenience 3 nearly Evangelion-class war machines. How can we really trust anything you say? Was the most important. Kaworu nodded. How can you be sure I'm not still under the control of an angel? Even if I say we're not supposed to be humanity's enemies, what's my proof of that? This is related to other questions. What do the angels want, and why has the Cradle returned in this condition? Kaworu held a finger close to his lips. Don't trust me. Only you can persuade yourself. I'm not here to tell you what to do, what to think, but only when you know how things truly are will you decide. I'm here to give you everything you need for an informed choice. I know your fear, that the angel's weapon, the Mentalis Annelid, robs you of your free will, and that we have that weapon to deploy. But it is a poor weapon. It has conquered death, and for what purpose? Shambling, mindless monstrosities? The angels ultimately are a force of evolution. I believe such is Dr. Akagi's words. When angels attack, they don't conceive of these things as weapons, but as extensions of the self. Even the AT field. He waved both hands over his face and clenched them. The walls seemed to retract, shocking everyone. I am made in the shape of man. I know the angels. I know how much they hate, how ruled by instinct, how every attack merely an expression of supreme emotion. Humans and angels compete for the right to exist. This is my proof that I will bring the greater good into this world, that all life should be worthy of existing. This is my gift, this choice to be allowed to everyone, to improve, to become. Humanity should not be trapped by the choices of a corrupt few, but to rule themselves as much as they rule their environment. The greater good is not an object of faith. We don't require slaves. We're not here to turn people into weapons. No, it is ultimately left to everyone to decide how best to improve themselves. Stasis is death, Evolution is such a haphazard way into improvement. You don't have to accept regenesis, but the greater good is here to protect you anyway. Trust is not an issue here. We fight the angels just as much as you do. No, we will not withdraw. We can't withdraw. The lands around the cradle are hidden because that's the best way to protect from orbital attacks. We have already defeated 2 angels. You see their cores there. More will come, in shapes most suited to defeating whatever resistance this world can offer. We are in this condition as proof that relying on the brute power of large alien creatures is not enough. Not everyone here had undergone regenesis, but we all know, ultimately, it's not enough to rely on human devices either. When has there ever been lasting peace on this world? Even if the angels should be defeated, what is there for the power of the Evangelions? We of the Earth's Cradle are not interested in nations, in politics, or in any old creed or religion. Between human and angel, the dying and the immortal, the greater good is the rational choice. We will not force anyone into it. Don't trust me. Examine your options. Consider your flesh. Just listen to me and understand what I'm saying. We have the same objectives as those in Tokyo 3. We fight the angels as much as they do, and see no point in third impact. We bear them and the world no ill will. We will fight for our right to exist if pushed. This cradle is the source of a new age, beyond pain and misery. He gestured to the symbol behind him. The tree of knowledge, the fruit of life, together at last. All I ask is that you consider the possibilities. Misato shivered. He sounds very much like Shinji-kun. Except where the younger Ikari was as fire, an unstoppable force piercing through timidity. Nagisa was as flowing water, wearing down objections and letting fear melt into nothingness. There was more than just oratory there. It seemed as if the collective human psyche was straining, splitting in two. From out of nowhere, Nagisa appeared and seemingly stole Ikari's shtick. One had to admire the boy's chutzpah, though. He promised the world itself. The power of the Earth's Cradle was too great to ignore. It offered Europe the protection that NERV refused to give. Just because one's making a peace was no reason to believe that those hearing it may share the same views, of course. The media had an obligation to report it either way. The problem lay with how the rest of the world may receive it. Too much was already wasted in war and weariness. Those in NERV's conference room watched Shinji Ikari carefully. The boy might as well have been made of granite, such was his tense control over his emotions. His eyes were sharp upon the screen, doing as Kaworu said, considering and discarding possibilities, countless eventualities at a glance. Kaworu Nagisa's expression on the screen was far too mischievous for his own good. So this is heresy, Shinji decided. Now he finally knew how it really tasted. The conference continued. Let me turn that question around. What do you want? Kaworu asked, a disturbingly wide grin on his face. How many more would you send to die for just land, for the sake of national pride? What would you throw away for that feeling of power? We're not going away. We're here to break open secrets and unseal doors. Peace can only be won by bread and salt, not swords and spears. The question is, what do you want us to do? We are surrounded by your armies. Your word can shatter this broken world. He looked square at the screen. Act. Decide. Human beings are the masters of this earth. Let it be proven. Asuka grit her teeth. Even so, Germany is mine! Words couldn't convey how much pride Shinji Ikari felt hearing her say that. She remained the glorious child of war. Her humanity shone in all its pettiness and breadth. You dare taunt us with our own imperfections, Kaworu? She put a hand over her face, one eye left uncovered. You called me beautiful once. The greater good sparkles because of the endless diversity within. The greater good is now mine to uphold, she whispered. Shinji flinched. It had become a matter of doctrine. It could get really ugly. Rei looked unsurprised. She'd never really given thought to the future or trying to predict how others may react. No matter how others tried to reassure her, she still believed in her heart that she was not human. Watching Kaworu claim humanity as his prize, it changed nothing. She was a weapon and wished for orders, to kill and kill and kill until all memory of Kaworu, Nagisa and Adam was wiped from her earth. He hurts Soryu. He insults Akari. He will die. Kaworu laughed. Superior to human beings? I certainly don't consider myself so. Who decides what's human? Popular opinion. The same opinions that drives the crusades, that makes slaves, that condemns others as subhuman. Genetics, that are in constant change. You who stand here, different from those 1,000 years ago, 10,000. The mutations add up. Look at my eyes. The fold over the eyelid. What purpose does it serve? Yet I don't have it. The colour of the skin, the shape of the nose, nothing more to help man survive in his environment. Yet these things are used to judge men's worth, the difference between men and women. Fat, ugly, tall, short, genius, mundane. It's all too random. You preach equality and teach people to be ashamed of what they are. You, the media, you say you're there to speak the truth, but what keeps you going but the coin of advertising? What have you to say but the failure of decency? Markets thrive on illusions, dreams and outright lies. Millions are spent and flesh cut out just to reinforce self-esteem. Millions die and homes wrecked because nations and religions decide what a human being should be. Dead words deciding the lives of the many yet unborn. Man is more than just biology. You are not just your shell. Man is a society. To be human is to do the things humans do. To strive ever for perfection, for enlightenment, to touch eternity beyond the limits of mortal lifespan. And, for the most part, fail. To be a human is to be counted among billions, striving ever for the same thing. Improvement. Evolution is mindless, random. The angels only react. The form is secondary. Is that not why we have technology? But technology is not the cure to our problems. We all know this now. Ever has the greatest problem of mankind been mankind itself? Change has to come from within. Monsters will never defeat monsters. Only humans will be able to kill the angels. Humans are free to choose how they die. The walls of the cradle began to shimmer in many translucent colours. Questions, protests and murmurs of approval or denial began to rise from the gathered men and women. Why are we here? I don't know. Isn't it worth living to find out? What are we going to do? We will live. We will not be shaken. This little thing. A white snake-like thing slithered out the sleeves of his dark suit and wound around his wrist. The journalist gasped. The soldiers tensed for action. Kaworu chuckled lightly. This little thing. You're afraid of it. Afraid to be cast out from this Eden of the physical world. So be it. Just know that it is here. All the might of the cradle pales beside this discovery. Here is a chance for mankind to shape its own future, to be truly free. Immortality. Not vampires, not zombies, not werewolves, not elves, not fairies, not supermen, nor any stupid little term from your volumes of entertainment. My threat is not any army of deathless monsters. It is the knowledge that here I hold the key to humanity's future. We have the right to exist. There are certain philosophies about the inward path and the outward path, the perfection of self, the mastery of the without. Here I hold enlightenment in an instant. Humanity driven to the absolute limit. God's mercy in my hand. The end to pain, to infirmity, to disease. If the shape of man is sacred, then there is no blasphemy in letting it become as it suits itself. This is the gift of our peace. Let us live. We shall become as a new culture. Oh, hell no! Shinji Kaworu stretched his right arm out and clenched his hand into a fist. Kaworu bent away for a moment to answer a new question, and the backlight symbol behind him crumpled inward. Kaworu turned back to the podium and grinned. Now, let's have some self-control, he said chidingly. The lights brightened. Ritsuko paused the video. What the hell was that? She shouted, her ahogi springing up. Oops. This was sent 8 hours ago! Maya, transcript! The NERV lieutenant obediently handed over a folder. Ritsuko thumbed through the printouts. Still the same! She slapped the folder to the table and her glasses glinted at Shinji. You have some things to explain, young man. Don't give me that Masato treatment. Hey! A weak protest from a side. I seem to remember someone testifying that you absolutely were not a psychic. That was part of why the UN tolerates your speaking for the Psychana. Civilian oversight and such. But before he could respond, the scientist began banging her fist down at the paper folder. But this! So Nagisa is precognitive enough to predict how we here in NERV will react 8 hours in advance, and you can goddamn affect things 8 hours in the past! I won't have it! You will not draw me into your circle of craziness! Ritsuko-senpai! Mai exclaimed worriedly, reaching out for her. She had to pin the woman's arms to keep her from strangling somebody. Anybody. With the remote in her left hand, Ritsuko discreetly resumed the video. Now, let's all please remain calm. Fuck off, the blonde spat. There's no need for that language, Kaworu added, looking hurt. Ritsuko switched off the giant screen and slumped in Mai's grasp. You can let go of me now, she said in a very tired voice. She slid back over to her seat and cradled her face in her hands. It was bad enough 8 hours ago. Why is it things make sense in ways that make no sense? Yang was feeling out of his depth. Mana Kirishima was obeyed, but her words about NERV were taken with a grain of salt, considering her obvious emotional bias. His monitor swiveled over to Masato. He had no idea. I don't think I have to mention just how indescribably bad and effective precognitive nullifies planning. Certainly, he was accused of being that far too many times. Tokyo 3 is well organised. Just when I get used to seeing its military running smoothly and think it's all normal, I'm rudely reminded of how insane and unpredictable this place can get. I'm reminded that I'm still in a land completely foreign to my senses. Although, the psychic sprinkled all around Tokyo 3 with that same risk to the rest of the world. How does one outplan someone who can predict the unpredictable? A chuckle. On further thought, this isn't really unexpected either. Ritsuko brought out a pack of cigarettes from her lab coat. She waved away Maya's attempt to take out a lighter. Such a devoted assistant, and situational parallel hardly being any less disturbing all the time. She flicked her left thumb and a small spark cracked from her metal-capped nail. Such a trifling thing, really. Chemical combustion was so old-fashioned. Even if she was more in the biological sciences, it struck her as silly she hadn't devoted a fraction of her time and intellect into this convenience much sooner. Ritsuko took a deep drag of her cigarette, leaned back on her chair and blew out a smoke ring. No, not just the habitual weirdness surrounding this place. Ritsuko grinned as her glasses glinted. How can matter or the mind even survive the transition between quantum anomalies in macroscale quantities in perceivable space? We should examine those marines again. I do find it interesting the girls aren't surprised by this accident. Even you, Maya. It seems the information's blocked both ways. Shinji? Masato asked tonelessly. The boy winced. It was startling. His father had even warned him about it. Months ago, Nagisa would force him to act. For her part, Masato Katsuragi still had difficulty shifting Shinji from someone she had to protect. No matter what, he was never a threat. But in the end, the boy was just too much like his father. Why? She asked. She saw the two other pilots weren't surprised. She wondered if these children ever really saw themselves as human beings. What was it really like to command such godly power? Because I don't know everything, the boy whispered. Because I need you to be you, Masato-san, free and unburdened, so we can all have this time before the inevitable. The Katsuragi apartment, that life, it was his essence of normalcy. Would it be too easy to mistake that need of someone for emotional nourishment? Family, or as a pet? He could feel her hurt and anger beneath the icy discipline. As long as he was weak and pathetic, the issue would never bubble up. He wondered if Nagisa had considered this when allowing for immortals to live among mortals. The screen switched back on. Human beings are defined by their ability to choose. We are marked more for our differences than our similarities. Our history is coloured by the fruit of such differences. I have the deepest respect for Shinji Ikari, for Asuka Langley Soyu, for Rei Ayanami, for NERV and all that they do. We do this in respect for their struggles. Without their heroism, we wouldn't be here today. But consider this. There are those among humanity being hunted down and brought into captivity because of their abilities. It's said for centuries they were self-regulating, a society existing without a ripple among greater humanity. Why are they exposed now? Why are they persecuted now? Because of fear, because of us. For that fear, nations are made to violate their own people, to deny them the very protections they were owed. For what? A little tingle on someone else's senses? These people, who represent the unimaginable wonder that is humanity's complexity, are instead held captive by the mere chance we would arrive. We are here. But I tell you now, you have no reason to fear. The worms are just that, mindless, just creatures, nothing beyond human understanding. We of the Cradle petitioned the United Nations for a truce and to prove ourselves as willing allies for humanity's future. This darkness around the Cradle is the blanket that comforts the uncertain soul. The greater good is to accept how every element may benefit the greater number. We fight the angels, yes, but they are more worthy of our pity than our hatred. In time, even such beings would be mastered by the properly prepared mind. Shinji Ikari felt like slamming his head into a wall. He settled for the table. Bam! Bam! Bam!
Eloquent little monkey, isn't he? Ritsuko said idly. You don't have a monopoly on mass theatrics anymore.
This can end well, the boy said through grit teeth. If they can control the change when the mindworms interact with the psychic quality, it should be just as easy to switch back to the mutation forms.
It is a trap, said Rei. The nation should see that.
I don't believe it, said Asuka. He won't. He's not out for world conquest or anything like that sort of cliched villainy. He just wants to be allowed to live the life he was given.
Whatever he wants, his existence has a polarizing effect, Yang sighed. He preaches division instead of unity. Most would see two defenders and be glad about it, but it only dilutes the support you would need to maintain your combat states.
He's trying to help people,
Asuka yelled. Through a screen and several kilometres away, Yang held up both hands to try and calm her down.
No one ever said changing the world was easy or painless. Believe me, I should know.
Then shouldn't you not judge someone else so easily? At least he's trying. He's not a monster.
Little girl, monsters are nothing as scary as a human being with something to prove.
The shift in his tone jarred the pilot. The glint in his eye and the force behind his voice. This was a conqueror who could have seized the whole world 15 years ago. For some reason, people kept forgetting he was still a communist, or at the very least a hands-off socialist. Just because China was the world's foremost source of cheap goods, and that he looked far too lazy for such an active mind. Fine. He sighed again. I'm getting too old for this crap. He was going to have to do something.
Do you know why you were brought out here, young Master Ikari? It certainly wasn't to catch you in a lie.
He looked at peace.
The issue still remains that something was able to bring down the Cradle, and it's inevitable that it will be coming here.
Misato nodded cautiously.
China, as you well know, used to hold NERV Branch 4. 10 years ago I was asked if it would be worth investing a not insignificant portion of our GDP on a fairy tale. I wouldn't be who I am today without impact, but that event was hardly of any good for the world. 10 years I said yes. My people needed even just a possibility of revenge. I gave peace to my people, but the strength. As much as there was risk and some economic looseness from keeping them around, I felt there was something more we needed to do. But if not conquest, then what? I came here to Tokyo Free because I was curious about the truth behind those fairy tales. Because miracles start in the smallest of things. Do you remember Plan Orange? Even against today's allies, plans are made. Not just to keep militaries from being bored in peacetime, but just in case. China is prepared for yet another impact.
Shinji looked up, wide-eyed. Yang, the boy breathed. What have you done? The former admiral smiled thinly. I wasn't so idle either while you were gone. There are always plans. A few months ago I updated them. There was some commotion behind the screen at Cerberus base. All of them.
We can't arrest him. He's still got diplomatic immunity.
Yang, what the hell are you saying?
Not until something actually happens. That would just worsen the situation, you moron.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Not surprisingly, the Bundeswehr were overwhelmingly rejecting his overtures. The miasma was spreading for hundreds of kilometers. It would soon devour Germany in darkness. We hope for peace, but don't make the mistake of thinking us defenseless. This is our region of absolute territory, Kaworu said with finality. We shall gladly feast on those who would subdue us. He snapped his fingers twice. Shinji groaned and cradled his face in his hands. I go to sleep for 8 hours and things go out of control this much? He was never again going to trust any vacation. Unsurprisingly, Gendo had much the same feeling. If the United Nations were going to give special political status to the Cradle, Tokyo 3 was going to ask for the same exemption from most international laws. SEELE's political influence had waned, but by the damage done to the Earth's Cradle, it seems they gathered power of a more direct form. Not that he could really say that out loud. Strangely, Gendo had never really considered Yang Wen-li any threat to his scenario. Military force. Popular approval. How temporal. But the Chinese reunifier's existence did change several things. The Evangelion carrier was supposed to be a modified Delta bomber. Only very few of the ungodly huge stealth craft were made. They required huge airstrips, were very hideously expensive, and if ever should war erupt, it was certain Yang had already planned for them. Mere expensive toys could intimidate the world's finest military mind. His miracles were born of speed and cunning. The only worth of such bombers against his thrust would be to carry nukes. But it was also clear, if you'd somehow managed to piss off Yang, he'd already smuggled tactical nukes into all your metropolitan centres months ago. Yang had never needed stealth. His campaigns had been dissected over and over again. He always let you know he was coming. Nothing, absolutely nothing could stop him. Everything you can think of, every piece of hardware. He already knows. He's already defeated these elements well before the engagement. Speed. That was why the Evangelion's carrier was a tilt-wing VSTOL. It consumed horrendous amounts of fuel. It had a far shorter range, but even there the lessons were learned. Every nation had to shift priorities. Yang is coming. You need speed. You need unity. Yang is coming. You don't ever know what miracle he's going to pull next. Meet him quickly. Yang is coming. Be prepared for a run. He always lets you run. Fight with all you have. Hold nothing back. Constantly shift your weaknesses. Yang will find them. Always. Ironically, he would still lose consistently in Age of Empires and their ilk. He much preferred civilization. Polite people wouldn't point out RTS games only allowed control over a region, while world conquest was almost inevitable in turn-based strategy. Geneva was in an uproar. 3 armies were already surrounding the Cradle. How would Yang hope to add anything to that, with almost half the greater Eurasian landmass in the way? The UN Navy, primarily formed of American vessels, was crippled by Gagil. That left the only other navy capable of projecting power completely unchallenged, Admiral Yang's beloved fleets, which would still have to go through the Arctic Circle. Were it anyone else, it would have been deranged and impossible to get anywhere in any useful time. It was so hard to get into his mind. It was so easy to forget what they were dealing with. He looked so unimpressive. He had a teacher's harried demeanour. He was lazy. He was easily bullied by children and pretty women. He walked away from absolute rule. He was weak. He had trained thousands of men to think like him. There was subtlety and precision upon millions, tens of millions. He was the tyrant that never died, the dragon that lay sleeping. And that was why even veterans found his slow, deliberate demeanour so unnerving. Yang baptised the world with fighting men that flowed like water. The boy brought fire. There was a feeling of completion, of endings. I will not be grateful to that man, Gendo muttered aside to Futsuki. He brought the old man along to relieve some of the irritation in dealing with the mindless political sheep. He had very little patience for their antics. This is all futile posturing. Maybe. If Europe recognises the area around the Cradle as a political entity, then so would we demand recognition as an independent nation, with all that implies. Futsuki carefully moved the pawn on an antique chess set.
It strikes me as just amusing that still they have considered how the UN must pay for NERV's upkeep, but the Earth's Cradle is entirely self-sufficient. Fools. Yes, but this is not the time for overt threats. Even Nagisa knew it, Akari. We can't just threaten to not protect Europe. We need to match their offer, or they'll just drive us to depend on China. The professor sighed. I suppose you think it wouldn't matter in the long run, but this whole thing should have been done with months ago. I'm getting tired, Akari. I'm not sure I can handle so many more unexpected twists. At my age, you'd grow to appreciate certainties. It was raining outside. Weather patterns had altered all over the world. They were in one of the small side rooms while the rest of the delegates debated. It was night outside, and the most interesting thing to see was his own reflection. It won't be long now, Sensei. This world without you in it. The end is not so far away. That is also a certainty. Fuyutsuki pushed over a rook. Oddly, he'd always been better at chess than Gendo. The rules were just so static. The challenge was in adding chaos into the inflexible. Nagisa appeared out of nowhere. What are we going to do about this? For the first time, I'm afraid. We've gone too far. But can we be stopped? And Gendo laughed. Fuyutsuki shivered. Gendo's humour was often as twisted and unpredictable as the man. Nagisa, he is inconsequential. All these fools trying to figure out his plan. I already know that abomination's weakness. He's like Ayanami, you remember? Poor girl, crippling her, keeping her away from her human nature was their small mercy. Exactly so. An aberration, neither human nor angel. A tool. Lightning flashed in the distance. Gendo smirked, his eyeglasses glinting. He searches for validation. The boy has no plan. He takes advantage of whatever is presented to him. Always reacting, always using others as he himself was used. It is obvious. The thunder arrived. He will wait until he gets what he wants. Even if you don't consider the Cradle as a threat, there are a lot of things that can go wrong in the short term, Ikari. The world can't ignore the threat and opportunities he presents. We have too many secrets. They'll take us apart. With you here, they're hoping NERV won't be able to offer much resistance to official demands. Only SEELE could have brought down the Cradle. They're coming, Ikari. Can we really offer to weaken ourselves right now? NERV could fight the angels, but not the whole world. There is only weakness in uncertainty, Sensei. We will always do what needs to be done. My father's at Geneva, isn't he? The charges against NERV are too serious to leave to any remote conference. He's there to argue for the UN's proper response. Yang put in. But you are here, and now we need to prepare well in advance to what your father may say. We can't be sure. Not even I can be sure. We need to hear you say it, young Mr. Ikari. He could feel his pulse thunder out and his thin hand shook. To steady them, Shinji linked his fingers together. He put his elbows on the table to keep the shaking from reaching his body. He was blind. It was another cusp of probabilities. He looked up. My father, NERV, can't tolerate this intrusion into our purpose. We are the rightful defenders of this world. There's too much risk in forces outside of our control. Asuka slammed her fist on the table and pushed off her chair.
You selfish bastards!
She shouted while hiding her face.
So you're going to just kill...
No! Shinji shook his head. I'm sorry, Asuka. I'm truly very sorry. But there's no other choice. No, we're not going to destroy the Cradle. Not unless we have to. We aren't going to decide their fate. The red-haired pilot looked confused. Then horror gradually flowed into her expression.
You can't be serious. That's what... Damn you, Ikaris, you can't do this to me!
Ritsuko took off her glasses and rubbed at her eyes. It's a foregone conclusion. This is what it's all about in the end. The Cradle, Tokyo Free, those hybrid tridents, and the Evangelion. Fighting against the angels was duty. The piloted knockoffs. It would be murder. I'm sorry, Asuka, Masato added, hiding her face.
You're disgusting,
the girl snarled.
If this is what being the adult is all about. I have no part in this cowardice. If this was what you wanted all along, at least you could have said it honestly from the start. Damn you all! She pointed to Shinji. You just had to make him say it because you knew I'd have to listen to it.
I'm sorry, Asuka, said Shinji.
Shut up!
She slumped back down and began to breathe heavily.
I can't do it. This is too much. I can't decide it. Just let me fight. I'm a pilot. Don't make me look him in the eye as I kill him.
Asuka, I've said it before. If only I could just do it myself, I'd take your pain. I don't know how much you've been...
He told me he loved me.
Misato blanched. There was a dull groaning sound like stressed metal. Asuka chuckled darkly.
Does that make you angry, Shinji? Hell, I should be jealous too, somehow. He's baiting you. He's waiting for you.
And that was both irritating and intriguing.
The logic is clear, Ray said at last. The power of the S2 engine is needed to combat multiple enemies. It is something they cannot duplicate. Your experience and skills are necessary. I must stay to defend Tokyo free, for several reasons crucial to our defense.
Lilith's soul must not meet Adam's container.
Pilot Akari cannot go.
Shinji looked up, nodding slowly.
I told you I would hate you if you pretended to be weak.
Asuka snarled. Shinji sagged. You can decide not to kill him. He might actually be speaking honestly, and we may really be able to work together for the good of the human race. Only you can try to talk to him, get the Cradle to accept our authority. Asuka, I made a promise to you. I won't kill him. I won't meet with him. I won't tear out his organs with my bare hands. I won't take his skull for... BAM! Shinji slammed both fists into the table. He could feel it, the utter rightness of it, but it would hardly be so convincing under the court of popular opinion. There are many things I can't do. To hold back if I actually face him again. I'm afraid I can't do that. The fallout would be catastrophic, maybe literally so. I'm sorry. I'm not pretending. All my abilities are useless here. I hate him. I hate him more than anything. Damn the consequences! There are no innocents. It won't be about who's right and wrong, just senseless conquest. I will not play the tyrant in his little drama. I can't be trusted, not like this. Only you can bring us a solution, Asuka. I'm really very sorry. We're forcing you to carry this burden. We need you to be strong. We need you now more than ever.
In the end, only Soyu can go to Germany,
Ray finished. Asuka stifled a scream. She began to hiccup through bared teeth.
So,
it's not like I can disobey a legal order, can I? What makes you think I will just betray you and join his side if you let me go?
The fact that you can say our side and his side,
Misato added numbly. Ritsuko tossed aside the stub of her cigarette and stood up. She pointed at Shinji again, her lab coat swishing as she did so. The strong light of the projector behind her shadowed everything with her glasses.
Face it, Asuka Langley Soyu. You're the sanest, most emotionally well-adjusted pilot here.
Shinji and Ray nodded in eerily perfect synchronization.
What? You're all insane!
Asuka said flatly.
I've been saying that all this time. That is very much the point,
Ritsuko replied. Asuka groaned and began to rub the bridge of her nose.
No, I'm serious. How in the hell do you expect to move Unit 2 halfway across the world? We already know shipping it by sea is slow and stupidly vulnerable. Berlin 2 had a rail leading to a harbour like this place. Now that thing? Gone. And the Cradle's all the way inland. In retrospect, it's pretty damn obvious I can walk there, but you still have to get me all the way around the South China Sea, then the Indian Ocean, then the Mediterranean.
The red-haired pilot touched her throat for a moment. Apparently enraged enough frustration was a good enough cure for hiccups.
Yeah, I'm sure I can manage it. I'll walk along the seafloor if I really have to. The other Ava has it easier. Boston too can get through the Atlantic to the North Sea just fine. But what have you got?
There were plans to convert the UN's Unabomber,
Yang noted.
but they were cancelled for some reason.
Evangelions weighed enough to convincingly challenge battleships. Even the massive Delta Wing bombers would strain to carry that even for a few 100 kilometres.
Too late to try and refit one, I suppose.
Ritsuko snorted.
How pedestrian. Maya!
She clapped twice.
I require
the thing.
Yes, Senpai, I will bring you the thing.
She pulled out a large black suitcase from under the table. Shinji looked surprised, but then had realised the thing he found all those years ago was a standard heavy-duty model. Maya brought out a large metal disc with a raised rim. It was about a handspan thick and had a dull brush sheen. She plonked it down the centre of the table and began to hook up connections to the wall sockets, 110 volts power and fibre optic links to the Magi.
The thing is prepared,
She announced gaily.
Excellent.
What is that?
Misato asked, looking suspicious.
It looks like a landmine. It is a portable holographic interface and local data recovery unit. I call it Hilda.
The top half split out into 4 sections. Ritsuko raved and the glowing centre of the device lit up, ionising the air above it. Pumps and humidifiers worked to make the region full of denser gases. Hundreds of little lasers activated and played in patterns. Out from the mist, a tiny but shapely woman in a long flowing dress emerged. Her voice from the speakers had a pleasant contralto. She held a silvered spear.
Greetings, my doctor. You called for me?
Ooh!
Asuka couldn't resist an excited giggle.
A Valkyrie! I recognise this from the Ava Fantasy RPG!
You are Surya, child of destiny. I greet you, my princess,
The figure added with a bow. Maya muttered something about preferring the name Cortana. A naked female advisor would have been just too obvious as marketing appeal. It was clear the programmers could get a little too attached to their little AI, no matter that Ritsuko allowed it to grow inside the Magi. So it was important to remember that it was just a thing. An interface. Not a machine spirit, not a person. It wouldn't pass any Turing tests, but there was a disturbing amount of self-awareness. It was fortunate Misato didn't hear Ritsuko mutter,
It is also a landmine. There's a difference between the antimatter equations and, of course, having a gram of antimatter. The Dirac Sea was a hole in space-time, of quantum-level events in macrospatial quantities. The mind recoils. Such things are not supposed to happen. Philosophy tells that mere knowledge of past events is no guarantee it will do so in the future. We can never really know the sun will rise tomorrow. We can only trust in the assumption that it will. That sleep is not death. Facts follow upon the footsteps of observation. Repeatable occurrences provide comfort and surety. Yes, that's true. The predictable is what we call law. Without the experiment, the theory is without value. Ritsuko's... Silence!
The scientist slammed both palms on the table.
How does matter even survive the transition between macroscale and quantum states? Answer, it doesn't. The things that are not supposed to happen do happen, all the time. It's just that we don't notice it happen. There is no transition.
She pointed at Shinji.
You are a freak. And a fool.
Misato had to say,
Hey!
but the boy made no move to deny it.
You mess with causality, and that gives us superliminality. Foolish boy. Do you have any idea how many scientists nearly burn themselves out trying to wrap their minds around psychoreactive quasi-crystal and spools of room-temperature superconductors? These things aren't supported by all known principles of physical structures. They should at best only exist within the confines of an AT field.
Ritsuko, what are you saying?
If it can happen here, it can happen somewhere else. Causality, once messed with, means it has always been messed with. It drives me to wonder if our known laws are merely expressions of absolute territory within this star system. It makes me curious about what may lie beyond the shell of this gravity well.
The boy was just too much like her father. Ritsuko, for all her pride in her logic and sensibilities, knew she was a prisoner of emotional needs. After all, for Gendo she'd worked to condemn the world. There was no question of divided loyalties, for she had none for the boy. Little by little, however, the world was showing itself as worth keeping.
What sort of madness are we going to inflict upon the galaxy? Fools! I will destroy you all before I let... Focus, senpai!
Ritsuko blinked. She took deep breaths and lit up another cigarette.
Oh. What were we talking about?
She shivered as if caught in an afterglow.
The new Evangelion carrier? Ah, yes. It's not enough to just bring the Evangelion. To fight it requires munitions, support crew, replacement armour. We already took apart what remained of NERV Germany, so now the Ava will need to bring its own supporting elements. Might as well bring a mobile field base.
I still want to name it Pegasus, senpai.
Ritsuko pretended not to hear that. She would not be drawn into any more giant robot silliness than what was already apparent.
This, of course, rests upon the idea Unit 2 can deploy and maintain an AT field for flight. It wouldn't be too difficult, since we can't seem to turn it off anyway.
Asuka began to rub her forehead.
You people are just gonna make me keep trying until it happens anyway.
The holographic emitter showed Ava Unit 2 face down. Girders and decks appeared around it, turning into a cylindrical framework. Engines here and there, weapon mounts all over, and a command bridge.
You're making me go there in a Zeppelin! Of course, I should have known! All of this is just a pun on my mother's name!
Asuka began to bang her head lightly upon the table. She looked up and hissed.
I hate you all so damn much!
Ritsuko looked away.
A fortunate coincidence.
Frustration shared was frustration lightened. Asuka should have been well familiar with Schadenfreude.
You're just ganking whatever you want of the fantasy battles. My God, the material finally loops back on itself.
At least they meant no malice, but it was such a stupid pun. She also understood just how difficult it was to resist. Maybe she really did need to get away from the place for a while.
Getting sued off your asses is going to be the least of your problems.
Given what we've seen in the IT field for propulsion, it shouldn't be that difficult,
Mai added helpfully.
We know that they can manipulate molecules directly, like a funnel for a jet engine.
Gagiel's underwater propulsion pulled and shoved water around itself, hence why it couldn't maintain a solid defensive shield.
We know it can be used to push against the ground.
Massachiel's and the Evangelion's great leaps.
Then there's also some mass lightning properties.
Material shouldn't even be able to fly or support its own weight with its spindly limbs.
It is not impossible, Soryu, Ray added. The mechanics of AT field flight are not unknown to me. It is no longer a secret that I am capable of manipulating an AT field, and I have confidence you will learn its feel and learn to control it through just that quality.
Yang looked doubtful.
The greatest principle in war, ever since ancient times, is overwhelming speed. I'm impressed, Dr. Akagi, but 2 questions. How much can this carry? How quickly can it be built? And most important, is it safe?
No limit. It depends, but we can use the material from the cruisers. Since the Abra provides most of the motive power in the first place, everything else is just for padding and controls. Safe? Of course it isn't safe. It will be the largest man-made object to ever go faster than the speed of sound. I can make calculations about what it takes to throw a battleship into orbit. We have no idea what will happen. No one does.
Which is why this maneuver satisfies to overawe everyone who doubts NERV, and by presenting the unknown and unforeseen bulk of the enemy's plans.
Yang nodded, pleased. He had tried making plans to counter NERV, then realised it was pointless. The city was just too crazy. That same madness meant it was incapable of doing any lasting conquest, despite what others may fear. Holding ground was simply impossible without infantry. Order was impossible without any overreaching policy. Yang and China had very little to fear from NERV's unconventional power. That was why Nagisa was digging in, he realised. Plans were worthless against the primal forces of NERV and the madness around Shinji Ikari. That was why baiting NERV to fight on grounds where the Cradle held every advantage was such an artful strategy. Yang looked at everyone else there, all still so young and in the prime of their lives. They looked tired, but completely unintimidated by future perils. He hoped Nagisa had neglected the higher strategy that was the root of their strength. For it was also written, place your army in deadly peril and it will survive. Plunge it into desperate straits and it will come through in safety. 2 Evangelions, one of them still unblooded, against what the art of war named desperate ground. Utter madness. Yang felt like laughing for some reason. Tokyo 3 affected everyone that way.